Hello and welcome to my beginner's guide of Erannorth Chronicles. I'm Icon, and this video will guide you through the basic gameplay loop. I will also explain all the necessary gameplay mechanics you need to know to actually enjoy the game, and I'm also going to wrap up the bigger picture of this game as good as possible. So this video will be ideal for people that struggle to get into the game, or people that actually are interested and aren't too sure whether or not they want to go for it. So first things first, we're starting out here with a new character. Choosing the difficulty is pretty easy. It's either exploration if you're super new to the game, which is acting out as a tutorial game mode, or conquest if you like some challenge and you're used to deck building games and turn-based combat strategy games. The other game modes here, I don't need to mention them for a beginner's guide. They are just the many variants of playing the same game with different rules. So character creation wise, I will skip most of this here today because we're going to play with a pre-fabricated character. That's simply because the character creation in this game is vast and deep, and you can do so many things here that I'll probably dedicate an entire video about that. But for now, it's enough to know that you can just go for prefabricated characters and they all work out pretty decently and give you a good start. Especially good since if you don't know what you're doing while creating a character here, it could be that you create something that just doesn't really work, and that's quite tragic. So we're going to start out with with Dame Gwaine here, or a Nephilim from the Order of the Light who's following the class of a knight errant. That sounds pretty rough, but it'll all make sense in a second. So once we locked her in, we see now up here how these things have changed. So let's go over it. Organization is what kind of faction your character belongs to. These factions offer you an entire deck of cards that you can draft from and character perks that you have access to when you're following this faction. So next thing to select is the species, which will change your HP, action points, and so on and so forth. There's a lot of races selectable, and every race also comes with a set of sub-races which you can pick. And the most important thing here is to know that selecting a race already unlocks again another sub-deck to draft cards from. Next comes the class. Here we have the Knight class, which comes also with sub-specializations and so on and so forth. And the class also unlocks, again, new sub-decks to draft from. And then there's the background menu, which, well, adds another variability selection here. If you don't know what to pick, just pick Fresh Start. It'll yield you a couple of extra points. The other methods here are good if you know what you're doing. And after all that's been selected, you end out with a character sheet that will look something like that. So, quickly explained. Here we got our HP, that's how long we survive. Action points, how many actions we can take per turn. How many action points per turn we regenerate. How many allies I can hold. How large my minimum deck has to be, and how large my hand size can be per turn. Attributes influence how you resist and deal damage. Every type of damage is linked to a certain attribute, and they also influence a couple of your base stats, but I'm going to go over that later. What's way more interesting now is this lower half here. You see, I've now got access to the physical realm of combat, to the metaphysical realm of angelic runes and forsaken skills. I also got access to angelic magic, religion, diplomacy, leadership, and more forsaken. Each of these down here is an entire skill tree with an entire deck to draft from. So if you click one of these, you can preview what kind of cards there are involved there. Pretty nifty if you want to know what these skills are actually meaning, but I'm going to explain how to read this in a couple of minutes. For now, we'll just leave this character as it is. It's completely finished, and the points are distributed in a way that it makes sense. I just wanted to let you know how a character in its principles is built. You first select a set of races and a class which provides you certain subdecks to draft from, and then you will try to mix and match that it makes sense. For example, this is a Nephilim commander. Nephilim are partially angelic people, so it's a good fit. Knights are per se coming with leadership skills, so these things come. These skills all come from your classes and races, and this is a mixture of pretty synergistic things. And if you don't know what you're doing, it might be hard to find the synergy. But enough of that. Let's finally start playing. So when you're starting out, you get spawned into a large and lush world here. So that's the entire game world. Pretty neat, isn't it? So your character now is standing there, and the first things we want to do is check out how movement and everything works. So left click and dragging moves the map. Right click moves your character across the map. Whenever you have this symbol here, you can left click a location and check out what it can do for you. So in every location you can enter a settlement where you can buy stuff, and there's also adventure locations. These here mean that it's these map icons here mean that it's a randomly generated environment where there's always something else. And these cowled figures here, let's see, these icons here mean that it's a one-time challenge mission that will yield pretty unique rewards. So before we get started though, before we do anything, the first thing I like to do is to go for my character sheet, which is hidden behind the button C. You can of course access that also differently, but I find that a very easy thing to go for. So this is your character sheet. Most of the things that happen here, I've already explained them a moment ago. So you see here your resistances towards certain damages and your affinities towards certain damages. Affinities mean that you will, whenever, for example, Dame Gwaine uses a skill that does slashing damage, she will do 3 points more of that. And whenever she's receiving slashing damage, it's going to be reduced by an extra point. If you want to know how these things are interlinked, you can get very good readouts here by just hovering over your attributes. So you see which kind of type or which kind of energy is linked to what attribute quite easily. But you also see here, for example, resilience will also increase my hit points. Pretty simple enough. And over here we see those skills which will unlock cards for your character. Over here is a vast and big perk tree where you can specialize your character even more, but more about that later. I don't want to explain that before we have had a look into our cards. What's really important here as the next thing is go into the equipment tab and equip the items you got on yourself. As the knight, I come with 2 weapons here. I got the heavy hammer and I got a silver longsword, but I have to decide which one. And I also got a round shield. Let's just equip them for now and go over them later. It's just very important that you equip those starting items, otherwise you won't benefit from those. Okay, that's all we want to do here. Let's get into adventure. So we're going in here, and there's always at your starting point one area which is including enemy levels 1 to 1, and that's exactly where you want to go. Here's a little bit of something that I want to explain. There's these ley lines. Ley line affinity and ley line aversion. This means the energy types that are here depicted, that's light, earth, and I don't know which one. These will yield a bonus when you deal damage with them, and the aversion type energies here will be reduced if you use them. I don't know if it's also amplifying the damage that your character receives, but you get the idea. When you see these areas and your character is using a certain type of element, for example, you're playing a pyromancer who's running fire magic, you see here, this might be a harder area for him. But just wanted to explain what these things do. Now, we're going to explore our first area here. So our character is standing here. And now for that user interface. Up here, we see the nodes that the dungeon consists of. Down here is our hand of cards that we right now got. So there's the silver longsword I have equipped and the round shield I have equipped. The thing about equipment is equipment cards will be automatically added into your hand at the beginning of each turn. You don't need to draw them because you have them in your hands. The other cards in your deck are here in your draw pile. For Dame Gwaine, her deck looks a little bit like, her deck will, well, it ultimately looks like this, but I want to explain it in action and go into this deck builder menu afterwards because it will make a lot more sense 5 minutes later. So we're now going to go into our first battle because, like, fighting stuff is at least 60% of what you're doing in this game. So let's enter the area. Pressing space or pressing that arrow here will get you into the first combat. So easy stuff. First off, your menu will look like that. Down here you see a button for reveal intent. I can only recommend you to turn that on. It's regularly linked to the button I. So this will show you what your enemy is up to. Whenever you fight an enemy for the first time, you will be not able to see his or her intent. You need to beat them once to get that readout. But I personally found that invaluable in the long run. Okay, so now let's have a look at these cards down here. So first off, let's check out a card as it is here. So when you click that top left icon here, the sword here, you get the codex entry of the item, which is pretty cool. So up here we see how many action points the card will need. 1 action point. And it's also depicting what kind of element this attack is. Slashing. The next thing up here is the requirements of the item. So it will require a value in combat. You remember that's a skill my character has. Of at least 1 or more. Check. We have 4. And there are several items and skills in this game that have a way higher requirement than that. Now, let's get to the actual card text, and that's where Erannorth is a little bit clunky and a little bit hard to understand. I can't put it into friendlier words, but promise you learn to read this rather quickly. So this card here tells you, if you play it, for one, this is a one-handed weapon. You will gain 1 resist of slashing damage. So basically, once you play that card, you go into a parry posture. It also says that this item is a silver item times 4, which means enemies weak to silver will suffer quadruple damage. And down here, when I play this card, I will deal 3 to 6 slashing damage. Down here, you see the target of the attack. So basically, all of these things will happen when I play this card. I will gain some slashing resistance for 1 turn. I will deal damage, which will be quadrupled if the enemy is susceptible to that. You can play cards by holding down the left mouse button and dragging and dropping them onto them, but what's also pretty elegant, tapping them once gives you the opportunity to click them again. So let's attack this Merkith here and see what happens. So I've dealt a lot of damage, way more than was visible here. So obviously this monster seems to be vulnerable to silver. That's the only explanation I can give to myself. Our enemies here are quickly explained. There's their HP. There's the amount of damage they will on average do. And as you see here, this thing wanted to flank me a moment ago and now it wants to heal itself. The enemy will interact dynamically on the happenings of the fight. So let's go for the next card. Here, the round shield is a little bit more complex there. So when you play the round shield, you'll get to choose to play either a block card or a shield bash card. And you will always gain 3 points of defense and 1 point of resistance against slashing, piercing, and bludgeoning resistance. I'm opening here the codex entries like that because I always found it super helpful to be able to read what these icons mean. So let's play that out directly. You can also play cards by right-clicking them, and now you see I can pick one of these cards. So either I'll take the block card, which will bring me 4 defense, and this little arrow here means that this effect will be applied to the next card I play. So you can also check that out here. Clicking on that little icon here in the top left area of a card usually opens up the codex entry, and here you see what this all means. You will look up things quite often at the beginning, but you will grow more and more used to these cards the longer you're playing your character. So we're picking up the block card here, and you see this card here is depicted as a self card. This can only play it for myself. So I'll just right click it. And now what changed up here is I gained a little bit of extra defense. Over here you see also your buffs. Defend 7 means I'm going to absorb the next 7 points of damage. And here's also my resistance amplifications. Down here's my HP, my action points, and my XP. So that's that for how the basics work. Now, my character's deck is full with specific cards. So here, for example, I got Bravery as a card, which is a wonderful example of how Erannorth tailors its skills. So let's read it from top to bottom. Knight Errant, draw 1, means if your character is a Knight Errant, you can draw 1 card. My character is a Knight Errant, so lucky there. So I'll deal 1 damage of slashing, and I'll also apply Valor 4+. So here you see that enemies will suffer damage for each point of Valor, so basically it's a flat damage addition, but wicked targets will suffer the triple amount. Okay, and there's also another thing here. This icon here means that the effect will apply when the card is discarded. It will amplify my next action with extra slashing damage if I'm forced to toss away this card. So that's how this works to read this card. And this way, that's how all these cards in the game work. And, well, our hand here ain't that good, but we can play one of those Bravery cards. Let's see, maybe I'll find something new. Here we go. So here goes the next one, Healing Light. Imbues my action to do light damage. So, well, yeah, here, imbue means that 50% of my damage will be converted into light damage. So playing this card will infuse my character with light, but it'll also heal people and activate another healing on the forthcoming action. Nephilim are extremely good at surviving there on their own by just healing themselves up like crazy. So let's play another Bravery, and I want to talk about another thing here, and that's concentration. As you might have noticed, I got a lot of actions that don't really cost me any action points, but there's concentration. Every action you take, which isn't marked as effortless, which is another thing that says you don't spend concentration to do that. Every action that's not effortless will drain your concentration. As soon as your character is out of concentration, you will gain fatigue. Every action you take provides another stack of fatigue. So 1 fatigue, 2 fatigue, and so on and so forth. With every point of fatigue increases the costs of every card by 1. So there is a limit on how many cards you can string into one turn, which is pretty good because otherwise you could just build a deck consisting out of 0 cost cards and steamroll the day. So let's go for this one. This is a good example for a card that has defensive values. And here, Persevere. If I'm a knight, I'm gaining Hex Ward. Hex Ward is basically armor against damage over time effects. If I am able to use the combat skill, I also gain extra action points, and I'll gain resistance against this type of damage, and I'll gain extra points of defense. So, pretty good stuff. Let's turn that on. Since I'm a knight, this skill is basically cost-free. And here's the next one, Duel, losing 3 HP, and Gambit means that either one of those things is happening, so we're going to pack out the Duel. Suffering some damage myself doesn't really matter to me because I got plenty of healing skills. Negotiate is a skill which is linked to the Diplomacy skill. This skill, for example, is available to me because my character is a part of the human race. Nephilim are a sub-race of the human race. So negotiate gives you the ability to either to befriend the enemy if his HP is smaller or equal to 12, or apply vulnerability, weakening, or drawing cards. So let's see. I befriended that enemy. Next one here would be Resolve, but you already might be able to see how it works. It adds 2 damage to my next action, it heals me for 4 HP, and I'll also gain Retribution. I don't know what Retribution is, I'll read it up in the codex. That's how you how you have to understand all your cards in this game. And if this is all confusing to you right now, let me say one thing, and that's where I have to be honest. Erannorth includes a certain learning curve. But once you have fought like 10 or 20 battles with your character, you will know every of your actions pretty well. And there's another thing which is quite fun. Actions in this game, well, let's see, I can't do this one here. Actions in this game can also level up. So let's wait out the next turn. So here's a good example. So here, the longsword I use, you see there's a maximum level depiction where I can see how it'll change. And as you can see, the more I will use this sword, the resistances rise, the damage rises. And when you hover over the item, you see there's a card level, that's the bottommost block there. Card level 0, max 2, XP 1 of 10. So every time I use this card, I grow better at using it. You see, this happens for all of these cards that have these little crystals on top of them. So yeah, let's finish off these beasties. For example, there's lots of options how to do this. Now I got my action cards here, decisive hit. If I am able to do combat, I add a vulnerability. What's the meaning of vulnerability? It makes enemies suffer more damage. You can also click these things here, and if there's ever anything that doesn't get explained in the area here, sometimes that happens, you can also search for a certain term and look for it. So for example, let's say I don't know what retribution means. I'll just enter it there, and you'll get a nice readout of all the things. I can only recommend it because this game uses a metric ton of different attributes and things and whatnot. But this works out really well because you'll only have to worry about your own effects pretty much. Your enemies work pretty simple. They don't use too many different skills. They use a variety of debuffs your character will use as well, but apart from that, they usually do a couple of things. Debuff you, attack you, or heal their allies, or a couple of extra things, but they are nowhere close to the complexity of your character. And that's pretty cool, because you will face really large amounts of enemies, and that's where this game actually balances itself out pretty well, because you're playing a big bad deck simulator here, and it's a lot of fun because your character's complexity is something you will master in the time while you're playing this. Another thing that's really worth mentioning, whenever you don't want to use cards, for example here the Healing Light, if I don't want to use that, you can discard them over here. If you don't discard these cards, you'll be stuck with them for a while here. So here, for example, I got these cards forced into my hand by these frogs, and I can't even discard them, so I'll have to use them whether I want or not. You could use these cards onto the frogs to befriend them and make them your allies, but if you don't, you're stuck with empty cards in your hand. Reading stuff is a lot of the early game experience, and well, as you can see here, we're getting beaten down pretty hard. To avoid that, you will have to do a couple of fights with your characters, and that brings me back to the point where I strongly recommend to use pre-generated characters, because they will teach you the best how to win fights. But if you need help in general, try to find effects and use effects that heal you quite reliably, use effects that give you defense quite reliably, and use effects that stun or disable the enemy as often as possible and go from target to target. If you disable enemies with stunts and such, be warned though, it's really important to know that you will be waking them up if you damage them again. But there's a lot of explanations behind that. I don't want to go too deeply into that. What I want to explain now is, when we go back into the character menu, how to read all these things there. So before that though, I want to go into the perk menu here real quick. So the perks here, you see there's perk points. You'll gain them in the course of your adventures. And they will give you all manner of different power-ups here. Stiff gives you slashing resistance and bludgeoning resistance, but you can't be athletic anymore. Athletic gives you other stats, and so on and so forth. Every character can gain perks up to really, really stupendously high levels. Here's the required level, and there's really a lot of individualization going on there. And you can really do a lot there. What I wanted to showcase here as well is, if you click into one of these icons, you can check out their the entirety of their deck. Here you can see all the items that are linked to the attribute and all the actions or allies that are linked to the attribute, which is really, really nifty. So for example, if we scroll all the way down, we can have a preview of the strongest combat effects. And all these cards can be either bought in towns or found as reward at the end of dungeons. That's how these things basically work. I'm going to go quickly into the town here for the sake of demonstration. We're just going to restart this character here. So we're going to go back to the entrance there, because I massively botched up my fight, I admit that, but maybe I was a little bit distracted with explaining. So, but it's really not too unusual to get beaten down early on. Oops, that was not really what I wanted to do. Give me a sec, I'll fix that. Now, it's not unusual to be beaten early on, but you'll learn that. And the pre-generated characters are all featuring a deck that, once you get a hang of it, will carry you through that learning phase. And if it's still too hard for you, just go for a lower difficulty level. That's fair and square. This game is pretty complex to begin with. So, in a town, you can go in there, and here you see several things that you can do. The game always starts out at the actions menu. I'd strongly recommend you to checkmark "Don't show me cards that I can't use right now," so you'll only have a readout of the stuff that you can actually use. So here's a ton of different actions. These are all things that your character can equip, as long as there's a green check mark here on that thing. And as you can see here, there are higher tier actions, lower tier actions, and actions that don't need any particular skill. It's a really easy rule of thumb. The higher the required action level, the higher the power. So you can really customize your character by a lot. Each of these cards needs to be bought separately, and you can have up to 3 copies of each card. There are also not only actions, you can buy new weapons. They behave just like the weapon that I've used before. And as you can see here, there's also higher levels of these items. And overall, to generalize it, also the higher the requirement of a skill, the more maximum levels they got. So high tier skills can also be upgraded several times, and they grow better the more you use them. Pretty nifty stuff. And there's also allies. Allies work like this. I want to give you a brief explanation. Allies, they can be activated for something. That's always that scroll icon. You right click them in combat when you want to do that. And they also have here a combat action, which happens whenever you drag and drop them onto an enemy. So you can either craft a new card here, infantry charge, or you can use them to attack. Up here you see their power rating, their HP, and how long they'll stay. But if you have this card in your deck, you play them out, then they stay on the battlefield for a set amount of time, then they'll disappear, and then you can resummon them. So once you bought a ally once, you keep him forever. There's also a lot of other things that I could explain here, but that goes just wildly too deep. So overall, Equipment is very important, and at the town you can find that. Also, whenever you get an opportunity to loot something, do it. You can sell every piece of equipment, every action, every consumable you loot, and money is pretty important. Your progression chain will be, you'll be looking for to finish all these things with ease, grind it out until you feel comfortable with that, and then you look at the environment, these other towns, and start grinding out these areas as well. And the reward is getting stronger. There is no big goal or big story behind that. This is a sandbox game where you mostly have to find and define your challenge on your own. That's a big downside and a big benefit at the same time. I personally love to have a wide world and a character to grind out from time to time. And the best part about all that, this game is friggin' massive when it comes down to all these options that you got. Because every single character that you can play is extremely deeply generated. You can mix and match these skill trees as you want to. As you see here, religion is its own skill tree with cards all the way down to proficiency levels up to 15. And that's true for a lot of branches here. Angelic magic. And it's up to you how you want to specialize and create your character. There's an enormous freedom of selection here, and yeah, that's also quite overwhelming, but it can be a good thing. So I hope that was helpful for you. There's a lot more things that I would love to pack into this video, but that would bust the time of this video. So I think with the things that I've explained here, you should be able to find out what you want to play and how to pull it off. Don't be too frustrated if fights are a little bit hard at times. If you don't get along nicely, just pick up another character class. Also, feel free to experiment with the character creation. Don't take my words too seriously that you'd only should play a prefabricated character. Go crazy if you feel like creating something wild. Go for it. Experimentation and character creation in this game is a big part of the fun, and there's nothing you need to unlock like in the predecessor game where you had to play the game to unlock classes. Everything is selectable from the get-go, so go crazy. There's everything. There's rogues, mages, demon disciples. This game got it all. So, drop your comments down below. If you have any questions left, please ask away. Leave a thumbs up if you appreciated this work, and of course, consider subscribing to my channel. There's daily content coming up there. All you need to do is turn on the notification bell and you won't miss anything from my side. Also, the description box down there yields you a couple of links. First off, my Twitch channel, where I do daily streams, or at least I try to. Also, my Discord community, where you can find a community of like-minded gamers. And last but not least, there's also links that help you to support my channel if you'd like to. I'd be deeply delighted if you check those out, but I surely don't mind if you don't. Watching this video to this point already means a lot to me, and I thank you for that. Have a good time, and see you soon. Bye-bye.